Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Merry Christmas.
That was your best Santa impersonation. That was really good. Ho, ho, ho.
That was not Santa. That was just me saying Merry Christmas.
No,
I was expecting a song. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised.
I think you're a big Santa fan. From what I know about you, you love Santa, but there's one thing you love more than Santa. That's Elf on the Shelf.
The Elf. That's what I was going to say.
You'll hear more about it soon.
Yeah. It's the Christmas season. We're getting ready to take a couple week break here before the new year and through the new year. But Christmas is upon us, and I have a question for both of you. What's your favorite Christmas treat? What's that thing that you're excited that is gonna, you're either gonna make it yourself, or someone in your family is gonna make it, or you just know you're going to eat it, and that's the thing you're looking forward to?
I'm going with a beverage, eggnog.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's true.
I mean, it's almost thick enough to eat, because it's not quite like...
that's disgusting that you can even describe it that way.
But nobody makes it. And there's definitely some companies, and nobody in my family makes it or brings it to the bash or anything like that. But and I've tried oat eggnog, and I've tried
I know you've tried
almond eggnog.
Yeah,
neither of them really compare, but
the real deal.
Man,
would you ever make it yourself? Like, just try it?
I don't think so. And really, it's so expensive too. Like it's
a treat.
Like 2 gallons of gas, worth for like a quart of it now.
Yeah. Well, it's that once a year,
Alex
treat
is just
yourself.
Our old soul.
Treat yourself.
And I don't want to know what's in. Like, you read the caloric intake of it, and you're like, how are there that many calories in something like this?
That there's raw eggs in it. Is that true?
I don't even
eggnog
want to know.
Makes me think eggs.
I was just seeing if you could make it yourself.
Yes, there's eggs in it.
Is there raw eggs, Eric?
This recipe says 6 large eggs, half cup sugar.
Those babies aren't cooked.
1 cup whipping cream, 2 cups of milk, some nutmeg, salt, pinch of salt, vanilla extract, cinnamon, and alcohol is optional.
No, I do not have alcohol in my eggnog.
Alex, I feel like you probably have all these ingredients in your pantry.
You whisk it all in a saucepan, so you do end up cooking the eggs in that. So,
but they're not like.
I mean,
they don't curdle.
They don't. You don't curdle the eggs. You just.
We're not biting into your.
Yeah, we're not biting. We're not totally.
But that's why they're thick. That's why it's thick. It's got eggs in it. Jess, how about you?
I would watch that video if you posted it on social media.
You making it?
I absolutely would, and trying it.
Yeah. Favorite treat, snack, Christmassy?
I don't know what they're called. What's the cookie?
In the tin? No, sorry. I just started to speak for
that you put the little Reese's peanut butter cup in too.
We don't do it.
You know what I'm talking about, though, right?
It's just a chocolate chip cookie, but instead of chocolate chips, you stick the Reese's peanut butter cup in it, right? Isn't that the same dough, kind of?
We do like a Rolo. We have like
a Rolo?
A Rolo in a cookie.
Maybe.
Really?
Yeah.
That's different. I've always seen the Reese's or the Kisses. I've seen Hershey Kisses, but I've never seen a Rolo.
Maybe it's all the same thing, and they're just using different
Kisses.
inserts.
How
How about you, Eric? Tell us.
It's usually some sort of cookie. Like, I love my grandma's recipe for ginger snaps. Christina will make those sometimes. Those are really good. And then my mom always had a recipe for kind of the equivalent of the Loft House sugar cookies, kind of those white, with the frosted ones, but they're so much better than the store ones. And
Can I ask
those.
you your own question, Eric?
Yeah.
Because I think that, I don't think a lot of people know that you cook a lot.
Yeah.
And I personally think that you're a good cook. Is there something?
I don't know if I've ever cooked anything for you, though.
But when I watch you,
Instagram.
I know you are legit.
Yeah.
Yes. So what is something that you make around the holidays? I'm just genuinely curious. I guess I could ask this when we're not recording.
I think part of it's like working at the church. I don't get to indulge that as much. Because by the time, usually Christmas Day is kind of just for our family. We kind of safeguard that. We don't really extend that outside of our immediate family. So I'll make a Christmas dinner, but it'll be pretty traditional, So, I don't know. I kind of, for holidays and that stuff, I probably get in real basic stuff that's just kind of holiday junk food that I like to cook. The cocktail meatballs are one of my favorite things to make because they're just so easy. But I'm lazy with those. I don't actually make the meatballs. I buy the frozen
and then
ones.
Put the ingredients
but the
in.
sauce is where that's the secret there, and it's easy to make. You get a can of cranberry sauce, like the stuff you have at Thanksgiving.
Okay.
Jello-y stuff that's in the can.
You just take it, nobody actually ate.
Yeah, you have that. You get that can off the shelf. It's like still there, and then a jar of Heinz. I forget what it's actually called, but it's like a cocktail sauce kind of, or like a chili chili cocktail sauce. And you combine those two into a saucepan, and I like to add a little red pepper flake in there, and then you put your meatballs in that, and it's really, really good. Super simple.
Cooking.
We need more.
Yeah,
we need more segments of Eric just
that's like a
talking about
simple
things he makes.
Bring some cocktail meatballs to the party, and they'll be a hit. People will be like, "Oh, what is this sauce?" They might think it's barbecue or something like that, but it's not. It's fancy.
Love it.
You made it.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Merry Christmas to everyone out there that are listening. Thanks for all your listenership throughout the year. We appreciate that. But up next, we're going to be joined by Dr. Karl Pagenkemper to talk about, the truth, traditions, and cultural myths around Christmas. Should be a good time. Stay tuned for that. Today, we're going to be talking about the truth and traditions, as well as the cultural myths around Christmas, the Christmas holiday. There's a lot out there, whether it's Santa Claus, Christmas trees, the origins of those types of things, Elf on the Shelf, cultural myths surrounding the nativity story. Ultimately, hopefully we land on pointing to Christ, or we won't be doing a very good job today. But we figured there would be nobody better to have for this conversation than Karl Pagenkemper. Dr. Karl Pagenkemper, welcome to the show again.
Thank you very much. It's fun to be back.
Yeah, it's been a little while. We like having you on here. We figured, who screams Christmas more?
Do you scream
Karl?
Christmas?
Christmas!
Yeah, I just hear him sometimes all the way
down the
across the
hall.
church.
Christmas.
Yeah, it's not just because on our staff you were voted the most Santa lookalike of everybody.
Yeah, I've been reminded just
What an
moments ago
honor.
by a former boss, Jim Ekman, that I have a gray beard. It's all gray now. I want to blame it on him, but I can't do that.
Very own Santa.
Why don't we start out by going through some rapid fire cultural myths around even just the nativity story, because I think these are always fascinating to me. Myth number 1: Jesus was born in a stable.
Yeah. Most of them look like a nice wooden stable. If you've done any kind of kids,
Yes.
watched any kind of kids play around pageants around this time, you have like that little stick figure stable in your mind and most of the nativities that you have. But it was probably more of like a cave. Allegedly, I went to it once, but it's probably not actually that one.
In Israel.
In Israel, yeah.
Visited the place, the grotto.
Yeah. So, but probably more cave, animals were in there, side of a hill or mountain, dugout type of thing. So that's one.
That's actually a debate too, by the way. Still, it's a debate because she could have been born given birth in a house. It's not impossible since animals were kept on a lower level. There's all kinds of discussion. The answer is we don't know, really. We know that when the Magi showed up, it says a house. Mm-hmm. But even the language behind an inn, the
more room.
Yeah. The noun just simply implies it could have been a guest room in a house.
Yeah.
And look, you're having a census. Everybody and their uncle's showing up. And in a small town like this, there might not have even been an inn. Mm. So it's there's too much we don't know about them. But we idealize it, which we do a lot about Christmas. Mm-hmm. So much for the stable.
That's all right. Myth number 2: there were 3 wise men. Only 3? Is that true? That's what the song says.
They probably came with a whole troop of people. I don't know. If they're wise enough, they weren't going by themselves. And I mean, traditionally, you've got Balthazar, Melchior, and what was the third one? Caspar. Mm. Supposedly, but we kind of invented those names, and mostly because we got gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
Yeah, the 3 gifts.
Yeah, that's
3 guys brought 3 gifts.
Yes, and then the question is, where are they from, and how do they find their way? Who knows? They saw stars. We don't know what those were exactly, but they managed to come. They probably came with a troop of people, most likely priests of some form in the East.
Myth number 3, which this is kind of tied to that traditional nativity scene, is that the wise men arrived at Jesus's birth. So you see oftentimes the 3 wise men and baby Jesus is there in the manger. That one's kind of my favorite myth because I think we really lean into that a lot, even as Christians who read the Bible, even though it says there very clearly.
I have a crash. Yeah. It's all the pieces are there. Yeah. It's right, I think.
It took the wise men quite a while to get there, and Jesus would not have still been.
Yeah. You need to have some shepherds there with sheep on them, and some kings and some camels and maybe some cows wandering around too. Get all those in there. So, well, the answer to that is that we don't know exactly when they rose. However, it probably was within a year or two. It could have been within a matter of months.
Jesus might have been crawling.
It's possible he was a toddler by that time because the word that's used, child, there is anything. It could be a newborn, but it could be anything up to a couple of years. But the decision on the part of Herod to execute infants under the age of 2 is sort of telling, I think.
Okay.
And so most people suspect it was
Under
2 or
2.
younger.
That makes sense.
Probably younger.
All right, myth number 4. Mary rode a donkey to Bethlehem. I think his name is Darylodius. It's a callback for our classic CCC family who's been here for many years.
Oh my goodness!
And thanks for keeping it PG with the word donkey. That's one of those times when you were a Christian, you could use the A word.
Yeah, I love the King James version when I was a kid because I could go, look, it's right here.
It's in the Bible. Jawbone of a donkey. Right?
Yeah.
Just in case. Slip it in. There's no donkey mentioned. However, I had to look this up. It's one of those things that you asked to put this on paper. I said in the infancy gospel of James, which I'm sure all of you have read, there is, and this is written sometime around the middle of the 2nd century plus, there's actually a strong tradition that Jesus went on a donkey. And this storyline, I mean, there's all kinds of things going on there, including the ongoing virginity of Mary and all kinds of stuff, her birth. But supposedly that Joseph was supposedly an older guy who was a widower, had his son lead Mary on literally she-ass, had to say that, a donkey, a female donkey, into town. So the answer is the tradition is really
we're going to
early.
bleep that out, Carl. We're going to have to bleep.
Can you bleep that out of the transcript as well?
You just got off your suspension from the podcast. Here you go, swearing.
But
that's why we love you.
Yeah, I know. Thanks so much. But yeah, the tradition is really, really deep. So we kind of mock it a little bit because it's fun because it's not stated. But it's early on, very well established. I mean, besides, she's got to travel 90 miles from.
Yeah, likely rode something.
Yeah. What else would she ride? She ain't riding a horse. Nobody can afford it.
And walking. I mean, if she's that pregnant.
Yeah,
walking that long is
not super fun.
Even if she's just a little pregnant, she doesn't have to be all that pregnant. But it's still going to be it's all up and downhill too, if you know the area.
Yeah.
So it's not a pleasant walk. So.
All right, we got one more myth. Angels sang to the shepherds.
Yeah, angels sang to shepherds, something flocks by night, right? Something like that. Isn't that like
what
a song?
Are you singing?
Go Tell It on the Mountain.
Oh, okay.
We learned that in ASL.
I just didn't recognize the melody.
Yeah, but you wouldn't have heard him singing if it was an ASL.
Yeah, we did not.
No, we did. We signed it. Yeah, nobody really knows. It just says they praise God, but the verb is they said. But, all praising in the Old Testament was a lot of his music. So it's not surprising. Mm-hmm. And we have wonderful songs. So.
But it was angels?
Apparently.
Yeah, but singing, I mean,
were they singing?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they do in Revelation.
Maybe they're playing harps.
But there's an interesting thought.
I mean, that's what the cartoons show me, so I just assume
sort of harp. I think that's cool.
Well, did they have wings? Nowhere does it even say the angels had wings.
Well, it does. Some angels have wings, apparently.
Yes.
I mean, you get in Deuteronomy, they cover their heads and faces and stuff like that, especially in the presence of God. But no, do they need wings? They seem to fly around awful fast, but they don't seem to need wings. So.
Well, hopefully everyone's ready to throw out their nativity sets.
Okay, that was fun.
I thought the angels did sing. Like, as when we're talking about all this stuff, it feels like, okay, did we all just like culturally are we experiencing like a Mandela effect where we're putting all these together? Like, we're coming up with conclusions because to some degree,
yes,
it's based on.
Over time, the image of the whole thing is an idealized image. We do this with songs. I mean, one of the jokes in my mind is listen to the words of a lot of Christian hymns that don't make any sense whatsoever, but they're ideals. Jesus never cried, that kind of thing was very, very common. But
Silent Night, is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Well, it wasn't that silent. I'm sure she had a wonderful time giving birth. And look, you're in a city. It's a small town, but it's not that quiet. This is people are coming in for taxing. There's a crowd of people going on, and it's not a quiet, genteel, something out in the hill somewhere. So I do think it's probably a busy time. So silent, it's idealized for us in our music, and we feel that we have great hope because of the incarnation. Whatever else we think about Christmas, which wasn't really a popular holiday in the early church, it just wasn't. But the incarnation mattered, so that became a more significant holiday because of that. Easter was way more important.
I remember as a kid, the myth that shook me that we did not listen here is that I was shocked to know that Jesus probably wasn't born on December 25th. And learning that, I'm like, what? I remember, do you guys remember like hearing that as a kid and you're like, that can't be?
I'm holding out that he was. No matter how much evidence there stacks against it, I want to be birthday buddies with him.
Yeah.
So
that's true.
See, I have the, remember they celebrate half-year birthdays when my kids, I never knew what that was, but my birthday is in the end of June. So it's kind of opposite the end of. I got gifts twice a year. It's midpoint, so it wasn't so bad. Those guys who have to have around Christmas time, that's a double up. That's not good.
Well, since Jess brought it up, let's talk a little bit about the 25th of December and the origins of that. I mean, there's some historical debate about when he was actually born. I guess some of my questions around that are how much does that actually matter, and how close is it to December 25th?
Doesn't matter. I would say no. Any more than the specific celebration of Easter, because Easter is a moving holiday. It's predicated upon a lunar calendar, not a Gregorian calendar. So the truth is, we're not sure. I think if shepherds are doing their sheep thing on a hill, it's probably not winter. More likely to be spring, because that's when sheep lamb and give birth, and you want to be around for that stuff. So now, truth is, we don't know. But that was the tradition that moved it to the 25th came a couple centuries later. It wasn't that later, but it was. So more likely spring, but no, I don't think it's that important.
Yeah.
I think, but for the Christian calendar year, we follow the birth of Christ through the year, usually through Pentecost. At least some Christian groups, starting with Advent, follow that, and that becomes a regular cycle for us to remember. That's more what that's a forming cycle of the year to remind us every year, and we've used that date since the 300s.
Because sometimes I feel like it comes up in kind of that high school atheist debate where they're like, oh, well, see, he wasn't even born on December 25th, and you believe that, and you're very childish, but also, why do you think that is, like, it feels culturally important to believe that sometimes?
We do the same thing with the 4th of July.
Yeah. Not
when was all that stuff done? Okay, first draft due tomorrow. There was a lot of stuff going on at that time. So we do assign dates. How important are they? I don't know. My birthday's important to me.
Yeah.
But a lot of other things are just reminders.
It's good to remember.
One of the things that's interesting, and maybe you could talk about this more, Karl, because I feel like with a last name like yours, you could really talk about pagan holidays. Boom.
Had to get to that in there, did you?
But one of the things that's always interesting to me is the other holiday that many Christians would assign as bad and pagan in Halloween, actually has probably less pagan roots than maybe some of the Christian, our holiest, one of our holiest of holidays inside of Christendom being Christmas. And there are people that would call themselves Christian that are not, they don't celebrate Christmas, and they're very anti, that because of some of the pagan roots. But what do you know about any of those roots, or how that started, and are there pagan traditions that we do, not just your family, but that we tie to Christmas and its infancy?
Yeah, of course there are. And I mean, from the the Christian world had the ability to take holidays and sort of hitchhike onto other holidays. We sort of ran over other things, and so whether it's a Saturnalia celebration or maybe Sol Invictus, oddly, most of those dates are later. 3rd, 4th, and 5th century when they're being established. But you couldn't throw a stone in the ancient world without landing on a holiday. They had holidays for everything. Mm-hmm. All their gods, like the church today, we have saints for every day that we could celebrate. Our tradition doesn't, but they have them. They had holidays all around. So you choose one. And why pick that period of time? Part of the reason is because it's basically, Sol Invictus is celebrated because that's the sun unconquered, S-U-N in this case, that the year is about to change, the shortest day, and now light's supposed to start to shine. So the Christians run in and say, yeah, that's right. The sun has risen, and our sun is going to take over that. And it seems that we like to inhabit holidays that are already there. As I said, you could have done it on the 25th of February, and they would have bumped into some holiday that was going on. But that happens to be when they celebrated, partially because the winter solstice period is a big deal. The cycle of the year starts for the sun coming back up. And the celebration of light, we just heard that on Sunday, makes sense. I mean, it actually makes sense. Now, whether the Saturnalia doesn't really, I remember it's later in the 3rd or 4th century that sort of settles down. It's going on, but does it become an official date? Yeah. Christmas, I think I actually wrote that. The first Christmas celebrated I know was under Constantine back around 336. Most of the stuff doesn't really show up until later.
Yeah.
Do we feel like, too, the term, just because of how I grew up, and I think a lot of our listeners would know, I grew up in a very conservative church theology doctrine, very legalistic. And so to me, when I hear the term pagan, I automatically think very bad, like anything, like a pagan symbol, like a pagan holiday. To me, I naturally, even as an adult, have this cringe of okay, am I doing something wrong? This is bad. Mm-hmm. How do we interact with that word? I still struggle, even just as we're talking about okay, Christmas has a lot of pagan symbolism or whatever that we'll get into more. But is it something that I need to distance myself from? Well, because it seems like we interact, a lot in our culture.
Yeah, we do.
But it is something doctrinally, theologically that
Yes. Yeah, it is a theological issue. It has to do with how do we as Christians individually and corporately relate to the culture around us.
Right.
Do we avoid culture completely and go a completely counterculture, or do we adopt culture and see Jesus in every aspect of culture, or somewhere in between, which is where most of us are? Mm-hmm. And but you look at the Gospel of John. Dawn mentioned it this Sunday when she talked about the word logos. If you're Jewish and you hear in the beginning, you know exactly what he's talking about. He's talking about Genesis. But if you're Greek and you hear in the beginning was the word, they hear the logos, and they are immediately thinking of something around the organizational energy of the universe. And they've already got a concept. So what John does, he takes a concept that's familiar to both Greek and Christian or Jewish communities and packs it with his own meaning. He just hijacks it and packs it into his own meaning. But as you walk through the early church, they're trying to determine, do we want to make Christianity the fulfillment of Aristotelian or Platonic logic, or do we really want to counter that and ignore it completely? And the answer is the church was across the map on that stuff. And it really was. And we still are today. So what movies do we go to? What do we celebrate and why?
Mm-hmm.
Do we celebrate Christmas? Because a lot of the church did not historically celebrate Christmas. And particularly even in their own forming of this country, conservatives didn't celebrate Christmas. They thought it was a pagan holiday because they didn't like trees and things like that. That smacked of other things.
Well, even to that point, I grew up, I did not have I never had a Christmas tree, never decorated for the holidays or anything like that. And so the first time I got a Christmas tree was when I was married 14, almost 15 years ago. And I still will have family members, if they know that we have a Christmas tree up in our house, they just won't, they won't even come over. I live in that tension. So it's just really interesting to
They must adhere to Jeremiah 10, where it warns about cutting down trees and decorating them and adopting pagan customs.
Yeah. They adopted all kinds of customs of the local culture. The problem is that not all customs are negative. Not all customs are positive.
Isn't there like a direct, almost parallel to the modern church in a lot of ways? The way that our worship settings are, like people would say it's like a concert, or it's like the type of, the church is always like co-opting cultural experiences.
Yeah, we are.
To make it relatable to the time and the culture and the people around us. There's
a good side to that, and then there's an insidious side of that, which sucks us into it. I think there's a lot about our culture that I enjoy. There's a lot of things about our culture I don't enjoy. I don't particularly honor it. And no culture by itself is necessarily good or bad. Culture itself is a gift that God has given us to live in. And I would argue that virtually every culture in the world has the capacity to be the vehicle by which to communicate the gospel and has built into it aspects and elements. Culture itself is hard enough to define. Trust me, just read some literature on it, and they're going to say, well, is this, that, and patterns of language and symbols and all, how we carry on in life. But truth of the matter is we're all multicultural in a lot of ways. Every church is multicultural, not simply because we're all of a different race or whatever, but because we have different traditions. So your tradition of not having trees as a kid. My family was just the opposite. We had trees and lights and all kinds of stuff. We like to do that. And as a result, I think a lot of this is where our roots are at. And sometimes we have things to overcome, and sometimes we need to say, okay, I probably went too far. There's no clear answers in conscience. We'll get into other things, but clearly the cultural engagement at this point is pretty trees and stuff like that.
Well, even outside of that, we're stuck thinking of it through a very American lens as well. I mean, just Christmas as a holiday, and you come into our atrium and you expect that we, of course, would have some sort of holiday trees, Christmas tree type of feeling, places that you could take a picture, and when you don't, like, people freak out. But you go South America, you go to other places in the world,
that's right.
They just don't have evergreens everywhere. Evergreen farms just sitting there for people to, take their family and their station wagon and cut it down and throw it on top and do all those things. And so even a lot of this is very the candy cane, for example, was one of those things that was made with the redemptive kind of quality, so you could tell the story and all of those things about Christmas with the shepherd hook and Christ's blood and all of those things. And so we take things that are, candy wasn't, Jesus wasn't handing out candy canes, hanging them on Christmas
he was
trees.
Because when you turn it upside down, it's a J for Jesus.
Of course, that's the other part of it too.
Yes, Eric.
And so.
And the red stripe is a symbol of his blood.
Yeah, and then the purity of the white. Yeah, and so. Which is a great...
Carl's loving this, by the way. He's so proud of all the knowledge I have.
Bring it on. Bring it on. I love it. I've heard of that.
All that to say was we do adopt things that are happening inside of culture and figure out how do we bring Christ's reign, how do we bring redemption into these spaces, something as simple as candy, right? Like, it's not this bad thing. And, if you have peppermint, it'll make your breath smell good, too.
What is the context of Jeremiah condemning the cutting down of trees? Because I think that's important to acknowledge. Is that something about carving idols, or is it
the whole section of Jeremiah 10 is about idolatry? And of course, they mock those things because idols that are made of wood, the best instruction they can give you is wooden. They can't talk, they can't move. You have to carry them. Isaiah, Jeremiah, they all mock the idolatry that's going on. So. I wouldn't. I don't get bent out of shape of applying it in principle, but I don't see anything that going on in the original text. If a family believes in its conscience that it's not a good idea, I don't mind. But I get more really realistic in biblical studies because that's my world. How many translations of the Bible do we have floating around? Every one of them is an attempt to make the text relevant to the next generation or whatever, and to make it clear. And so anytime we do that, we are granting acculturation matters.
Yeah.
And that we engage the culture not because we adopt it all, but because we live in it and we swim in it, and it gives us an opportunity to share. But every language group is going to see things a little bit differently. So we translate the Bible into whatever language is local. And we're another 10 years, we may actually complete that. AI has done a wonderful job there. So suddenly people hear the Bible in there, and we keep using the language, heart language. Mm-hmm. Exactly. How do they hear things? Because we are in a culture. We can't get out of it. We can't remove ourselves from the water we swim in.
Speaking of one of those translations, I'll just read it, just for those that aren't familiar, aren't every day in Jeremiah 10, 1 through 4, just so there's clarity of how this does parallel, and someone could say, that's a Christmas tree. Hear ye the word which the Lord speaketh unto you, O house of Israel. Thus saith the Lord, learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the sign of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them, for the customs of the people are in vain. For one cutteth a tree out of the forest, and the work of the hands of the workmen with an axe. They deck it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and hammers, and that it move not. And so I could see how somebody would take, okay, you're going into the field, you're cutting this out of the forest, you're putting it in your house, decking it with silver and gold, and boom.
It's tinsel right there.
Well, Jess, how dare you?
Can we get around it if it's up in our attic and then we pull it out of a box instead?
Which is why I do that.
Yeah.
I don't want to break this.
It's not an Asherah pole, though. I mean, the point of this, you can go Google Asherah poles and Astarte and those kinds of things, and there are literally hundreds of versions of this. Most of them are not salacious, so you can see them when they're actually carved into trees and the poles. That's their kind of stuff they're talking about. They're not talking about these kinds of trees. The word Asherah is often translated pole.
Oh, okay.
It is a reference to the god, but Astarte. But yeah, and she's an interesting god because she's like the female consort of Baal, which is why everybody sees it as such a nasty thing.
Sometimes when I'm sending a message, and I feel like I have to be careful working in a church because we do a lot of communication around Christmas and a lot of planning. But man, sometimes it would be a lot easier if I could just type Xmas instead of typing all of Christmas out into that message.
If you want to get canceled.
And that's what my fear is. And I've seen people adopt the CMS technique where they put C and then MAS, so just to shorten it. So they're kind of keeping Christ in Christmas. But then when I have been called out on it, I've used this argument about the Greek letter X. And maybe you can help add some clarity to it. Are we actually taking Christ out of Christmas when we use Xmas?
In the manuscripts of the New Testament, and trust me, I have a reason to go here. In the manuscripts of the New Testament, it was common to see abbreviations, mostly to save space, to be quite honest with you. Writing was expensive. But it was common, if you were going to use the word theos for God, you would take a theta and then maybe an ending, depending on the kind of, and then you'd put a bar over it with 2 letters. And we would typically abbreviate. It's very, very common. So the early church picked this up as well. You could have a cross. Have you seen the crosses? They have a chi rho. It's the first 2 letters of the word Christos, from which we get Christmas. So the chi was just a common letter abbreviation for Christ. So when I walk on a board or whiteboard in a class, I rarely spell out the name anymore. I just don't. The theta becomes God, just by habit. And so after you get by offending the first couple of students, and then you say, okay, this is what's going on. It's just a shorthand. It's abbreviation. The church did it early. The manuscripts did it. If, in fact, it causes you to remove Christ from Christmas, shame on you.
Yeah, right.
It should not. It wasn't intended that way. But if you're listening to certain news broadcasts, that sort of thing will make you feel like we've abandoned the roots of our faith. We haven't.
Eric, I can picture you later on today sending an email and your eye twitching because it's do I write Christ or X?
Yeah, I'm just going to start using it in the subject.
So sad, yeah.
Merry Xmas. One other thing that people like to do around Christmas that maybe offends some is that's lie to their children. We love lying to our children. It's our favorite holiday pastime, whether it's Santa Claus, Elf on the Shelf, whatever it may be.
You're getting coal for Christmas.
Yeah. How do we separate ourselves from that culture, and when is it okay to engage in that?
Jess, did you have these as a child? I'm curious, since you didn't do the Christmas tree.
Satan Claus.
If you knew of either of these characters.
Satan Claus.
Yeah.
Probably not. I mean, Elf on the Shelf is
I
more
don't
of
think
a
I
recent.
knew about Elf on the Shelf as a kid. I honestly didn't.
I feel like that's a pretty
that was
modern.
very marketed.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's more recent? I
Yes.
wouldn't know just because
it did.
Santa Claus, absolutely not. There is no way that was ever a part
You
of my
never visited Santa Claus
life.
over at a local store or something like that?
Nope, never. The first time I did a lot of Christmas traditions, even like the childlike, was when I got married and when I had kids.
Wow.
And it was like, like the first time I ever like went and saw Santa Claus was at Bass Pro Shop 10 years ago.
And now it's fun.
Right.
Yeah, now it's fun.
To me, yeah, it was cute.
It's a slow fade, as the song says. Where do you give yourself
Slippery
away?
slope.
Here I am.
We could probably pinpoint that. I suspect if you check out Google or history or something like that, it probably starts the end of the 2008, 9, 10, something like that. So it's relatively recent. Santa, of course, goes back
Yeah.
hundreds of years, but Elf on the Shelf is kind of a goofy modern.
2007 is
it
what
2007?
what I'm
Did you
getting
guys
on Google.
do
With
Santa
actress
or the
Jennifer
elf like
Gardner.
as kids?
I mean, I grew up in a very conservative Christian
2005,
home,
sorry.
but we still would have like a present on Christmas. We opened our presents on Christmas Eve, and then on Christmas morning we'd have something in a stocking and maybe a gift under a tree from Santa. And I think it was just I don't know. I just don't remember ever. I don't remember the time between believing in Santa and knowing it was just my mom writing Santa on the
Didn't
package.
seem to traumatize you,
But it
though.
didn't. It had no effect on me. It was just like, oh yeah. And then the older I got, it was just like I just looked forward to that, I guess, tradition of seeing a gift from Santa, knowing that it to me it was like, oh, my parents care enough about kind of keeping the magic, if I can use that word safely, of Christmas and in that tradition and that celebration. And it was just more about family and the love that I felt as a child in the home. You know what I mean? So I guess
Alex?
I never thought of it.
Yes. Yeah, I don't ever remember really a belief in Santa. I remember my conversations around Santa growing up were, don't ruin it for the other kids. And so like we had some neighbors, I can think of them right now, that their family was very much into Santa and, going every year, sitting on his lap, doing all the things, telling him, writing the list, all those kinds of things. And I remember my conversations that my parents would have was, just don't ruin it, for other kids. It's not real. Like I just don't ever remember thinking that Santa was real, but then also remember carrying that from even a young age, that burden of not wanting to ruin it. Because my parents were also like, don't be the kid that's going out and telling everybody and kind of, holding that over. I've got a secret that you don't know about the guy with the red outfit and the white beard. There's just, my parents didn't want me to do that. And so I would say, from that upbringing, I'm not a huge Santa fan, so we're not like a big Santa family, and mostly because I think it's some of the things that that I think are able to shape a kid's heart and the mythical part of it, and knowing the history of Saint Nick. It's like that's not actually. He's very different, the Santa Claus that we kind of are like, whoa, but it's got this Christian, this saint who would take and deliver presents to kids, and he was doing it in an honorable way. But the idea of he sees you, it's just creepy to me. He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake. Like that idea of there is somebody that knows if you're naughty or nice, but the reality is what is naughty and nice, and everybody still gets gifts, and people are like, but he's watching, you might not get that. And then that's where the Elf on the Shelf, I think, was put that on steroids. Because then now, not only is Santa, sorry, this is hot take season for me, but not only is Santa moved from this mythical being, now we have this little elf, his little minion that lives in your house now.
Scares the daylights out of your
and
kids.
And you can't touch it. And now he's actually watching,
and he
moves to prove that he's watching you. And to me, it just becomes it can become a very fast obsession. And I'm not saying people that do it that they're evil or any of those kinds of things. I'm not saying it. Though it seems like I'm saying that, that's just, to me, and I will also say I'm not much of like a fantasy person. That's just my personality. I'm not like a fiction guy. So a lot of this is probably just birthed out of that reality of who I am, and maybe I'm an old fuddy-duddy and I hate all those things.
One of my favorite videos I've seen recently on social media was of a golden retriever that was chewing on the elf on the shelf, and all you can hear is the blood-curdling cries of the children in the background, and the parents trying to console them. And I just thought, man, that's funny that it's not funny, it's sad for those kids. They were very traumatized, but that it had gone that far in their minds that this was like a living thing, and they're mourning the death of it as their dog tears it to shreds.
Because you're not allowed to touch it.
Yeah. Oh, is that part of the...
I think that's part of, like...
We missed that. Like, my kids are a little older. We just never did Elf on the Shelf. I mean, I try to talk to my kids about how the original St. Nicholas, he miraculously revived 3 pickled children out of barrels that had been murdered and pickled. But
I think he just rescued them. I'm not sure they murdered them, but okay.
Wasn't that I felt like it like gets into these. No, he didn't murder them. They had been killed. Weren't they been put into pickling barrels or something like that? Or
I know he supposedly saved the lives of people, but I think most people have demythologized that.
Yeah, no, I guess I'm being hyperbolic because I know that's kind of the mythos that is born out of it.
That's the way it goes.
But I mean, I think a similar story that I maybe have even shared on the podcast before was my daughter having this confrontation. She was probably 7 or something, and we had this confrontation at a dinner table at a Texas Roadhouse where she literally got in tears just saying, "Tell me the truth. Like, is Santa real?" And at that point I was kind of like, oh man, this thing that when I was a kid was just kind of fun and I didn't really think anything of it. It was like it's very real to her. And so I kind of broke down who St. Nicholas was and why we celebrated, and technically, no, Santa Claus is not real, and all that. And I mean, and St. Nicholas died a long time ago. And what she gathered from that is that Santa Claus is dead. And Christina got a call or a text message from a mother from her school was just like, why did Maddie tell my daughter that Santa's dead? I was like, whoops.
It's her little brain.
That went way more dramatically than I had anticipated that conversation going.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, as adults, we're the ones that are creating this. I mean, kids aren't necessarily asking for it. Like, it's kind of like out of our nostalgia, or maybe not having that, or wanting to create magic that you didn't have, that you saw, that you want. Like, there's so many aspects that we're coming at it from as adults.
Well, we on the one hand, kids have imagination, and to a large degree, we don't want to discourage that. There was a movement 30 years ago, imagination and all that stuff is bad for you. Because it allows you to invent things, and maybe the evil one is creating those things in your head. But our kids play with imagination all the time. They play trucks and dolls and run around and shoot things at each other and outside. So the imaginational element we want to encourage. The query becomes, can they distinguish between imagination and mystery? Mm-hmm. Because we think we talk about a God we can't see. Yeah. And of course, you kind of can see Santa, but you don't really see him when he shows up, that type of thing. So how do we distinguish? I actually think most kids are capable of doing that, but I grant that there are going to be some kids that's not a wise thing to do. And parents often, we do tend to infuse our lack or our desire, our own roots into the next generation. So I've never had a problem with it, as long as a child understands the distinction between how I view the incarnation and the death and resurrection, that kind of stuff, and how I might talk about King Arthur or things like that. And unfortunately, these get really, really close because now you're talking about family issues and gifts and what happens if a kid doesn't get a gift and where was Santa. And then we end up confusing that because some people die when we pray for them and God didn't resurrect. I mean, there's all kinds of overlaps, but that's why I don't think there's a serious single answer to this stuff. Mm-hmm. And we don't always tell our kids all the truth all the time. And sometimes this gets into. I know there are patterns. Wayne Grudem wrote a book on ethics and argued that there's essentially a unitary notion of the idea of ethics. That is truth telling. You can always tell the truth. And somebody asked him a question. I was in the audience, and somebody asked him, well, "What do you do with an American spy?" It's kind of self-defeating. So, and he had to at least sort of process that a little bit. We understand conflicts of ethics all the time. We live in that world constantly. So with that in mind, I think it's very family and person specific. And the problem is when you're doing it with kids, you don't know your kids well enough to know exactly how they're going to respond.
Yeah.
And you know what? We fail often enough, and kids seem to get along with us. So we did this. We did not bring Santa in the house and have him do a bunch of things. That wasn't our style. And I can remember when my older daughter figured out that Santa wasn't real and had to make it a point to tell my younger daughter, who already knew. That type of stuff was already going. I mean, so we didn't care. And I was 16 years old, and my dad got me a toolkit for a 1967 Mustang and signed it from Santa. I knew who it was from. I mean, I was 16. Of course I did.
Yeah.
So it was meant to be fun. And I think to the degree that it can be fun, fine. Elf on the Shelf is a little legalistic to me because it does look over. And it doesn't, I'm not in that group. But I do think, and that's a real problem if in fact we espouse some sort of law, grace, legalism, accountability. I like accountability. I want my kids to feel accountable, but I don't want to scare the daylights out of them with accountability. I want them to feel accountable. So there are some things values that we try to espouse and can be done in certain. Our kids, we read. Can I say this on there? Harry Potter to our children.
I'm going to bleep that out as well.
Probably. But, I mean, in the process of reading it, we had to tell the kids, be careful about what they talk about some of the other kids they're going to school with.
Yeah.
And I know this resides in our own church. There is all kinds of conspiracy thinking going on about all kinds of stuff that goes on. Just hang out in a MOPS group. Or hang out in a guy's ministry and just listen to what they're talking about half the time. I just know it. So we have to be. It's all over the place, and so if we're gentle and cautious with them, we still get along pretty well. Yeah. And I'm not too worried about Santa. Santa Claus, even the name Santa Claus, it comes into the English Santa Claus. It's Dutch, I think. But so you can even hear it. That's Saint Nicholas. Santa Claus, Niklaus. You hear it, and it even carries over. So there's roots in it, but they're kind of squirrely, and we don't. No, the guy who goes to sit at Sears doesn't see it.
Jess, how about you? I mean, you've already talked about the slow fade of having a Christmas tree, Santa. Yeah. Are you guys even more evil with the elf people?
Yeah.
Oh.
We do have the elf, but I will say,
wow. This might be Jess's last podcast, so let's hear her last words.
I think that there's varying degrees. Like, I do not tell my kids, "Oh, this elf is watching you. Be naughty or nice." Like, I really do think that you can weaponize Santa Claus. You can weaponize this little 12-inch elf, or you can have a lot of fun with it. And my kids, like, I think that they know we move it, but they are always like, "Where did you hide it?" Like, they're looking for it.
That's great.
But I do think, like, even as you're talking, like, yes, there's varying degrees. I absolutely think you can weaponize the elf and Santa Claus 100%. I even saw somebody that I know online, like, their kids were being naughty, and she was like, if something happens, Krampus, who we don't even talk about him, is going to come and beat up the elf. And they kept being naughty. So what did she do? She, like, got some of her makeup and gave this little elf bruises, and she made him look like he got beat up. And so to me, I'm like, okay, that is like also, it's like taking a play on something that can be fun or something that can be nothing and making it way more serious and making this a play on, like, behavior and something totally different. So I think that you're right, Karl. There is, like, such a wide gap of, like, what we can do. But yes, I have. And I'll add another one that I've done.
Oh, wow. Well, this is your sign off anyway.
This is my last one.
You're sliding off.
Let's go out with a bang. Yeah. Last year or the year before, I think I've done it 2 years in a row, I put glitter and oatmeal in a bag, and I had my kids throw it out in the front yard as reindeer food. And then because we have raccoons, it's gone in the morning.
Some glittery raccoon poop out there somewhere.
Oh gosh.
I don't know, but to me, like,
tell me Ben gets on the roof too and starts making the foot sounds at 2:30 a.m.
But for me, I think it's like keeping that. I don't know. It is magic, and maybe that sounds like really.
I think it's like what Karl said with imagination. It keeps that alive, and I just think it's so important for kids to feel free to use their imaginations, and
family traditions like that too. I mean, because when we were young, you put out the cookies. Of course, I eat the cookies, and the kids knew I ate the cookies, but it was still good. Or we'd put out a carrot because reindeers eat carrots, right? But you got to go back, take the carrot away, and put a little bit of red. Because the noses are on the plate. Yeah. And that the kids expected it, and it was kind of fun. Now my kids are in their 30s, and they're going around and say, we are going to do this, aren't we?
Yeah, where are the cookies?
Nah, not this year. No, you can't do that. You can't take it away, the tradition away from it. It wasn't weaponized. And that's the problem. We have a guilt complex going on with our kids, and we weaponize them too badly. That's not what I want to create. Sinners in the hands of a loving God. Not an angry God. So how do we portray this is fun, and then we still have to make the distinction between that which is the fantasy and that which is the mystery. Because I want to keep the mystery real, because I think there is a real live resurrection, but I can play around with the edges of that, I think.
Well, and plenty of people weaponize Jesus too, I mean, even inside of the church. I mean, I think that's where gaslighting happens. That's where spiritual abuse happens. A lot of those things happen when people are weaponizing Jesus for people's sin. I got a voicemail today from a gal that's just like, I've done it. I need you to pray that God could one day forgive me. And I'm just like, at the root of some of this, and as I talk to her, I'm just like, my heart's breaking because she's really thought there's no forgiveness available, like that. She needed to talk to a pastor, and I'm just like, man, what are all the things, the patterns that led up to her feeling that? And I'm trying to convince her, man, the fact that something's even telling you that you've failed and you've messed up, maybe that's the spirit, and just, I don't know all the details of what are happening in her life, but it just brought that, to me of like, man, I don't know how or why or all the situations, but man, Jesus has been explained in a very poor way, or she understands him somehow in a very poor way. And it was heartbreaking, to even listen to that. And she saw us on Instagram and just called our church, which is just this cool thing. There's that cool opportunity, but then there's that other side of it as well.
The pain that motivates that kind of connection. The guilt. We are guilt-producing machines. We guilt ourselves. We guilt others. We seem to. And it's a power play a lot of times too, or we feel like we've been powered over. I feel guilty because I was wrong, and that's not the image that God portrays of himself. Are we guilty of sin? And the answer is yes. Has God dealt with it? The answer is yes. And so forgiveness, I long sometimes, I have a little envy for other traditions. The Lutherans who every week start some of their services, you're forgiven. And they'll recite things about forgiveness and confession and forgiveness. And the pastor up front says, with the authority of Christ, I can say that you're forgiven. I need to be reminded of that. Yeah. Look in the mirror and say, I'm a screwball, but you are a forgiven screwball, and God has made things new. So guilt is an amazing, compelling. And the last thing I wanted to run around Christmas is to make kids feel more guilty.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'll add is, at the end of the day, if Jesus is like not the main character of your Christmas celebration, if you wake up on Sunday morning and Santa's the main character, and maybe that's even some of my own narcissism. I don't actually think I'm narcissistic, but like, I don't want anybody else to get credit. I paid for those gifts, But if Santa Claus delivering a present is the hero of the storyline, maybe if we're recognizing that in our kids and they're more excited about Santa, or, you're like, man, we spent hours making sure the elf is placed right and he's got all these different things, but we do zero kind of Advent or any kind of devotional stuff in our family's life. Those are where you're like, okay, I have to start asking real discipleship questions about what am I elevating this time of year? And I think that's where it gets maybe more difficult and where the rubber meets the road. And probably all of us can find something, whether it's not Santa or an elf on the shelf, ways that we could make Jesus more glorified and bigger in our lives and in the lives of our personally, in the lives of our family and those that we see during this season. And we can all take probably some inventory there too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, make a cake with a candle in it. My wife did that for years.
Happy
Little one.
birthday, Jesus.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah. So, but it was part of the other things that we did, but it was still part of it. So, and we would read a big book that had gospel story. Mm-hmm. That was part of the cycle as well.
I was always convinced that my dad read the Christmas story just to prolong us waiting to open our gifts, and it was always like the worst part of Christmas. I'm like, I don't want to hear this again, especially out of the King James version. But now that I look back on it, it's one of those memories that are, it's a fond memory. It's not a bad thing. Thanks, Karl. Appreciate your time and all of your knowledge in this topic. It's really helpful and insightful to people to help us digest. And hopefully nobody's going away feeling guilty. They're just going to have a good Christmas. But if you have any questions or concerns, you want to reach out to us, you can do that by sending us an email at podcast@cccomaha.org. You reach out to us on social media, on Instagram or TikTok at CCCOMA Podcast. Leave us a voicemail at 402-885-9930. And also don't forget that the Christmas season's coming up. So we've got 2 weeks or so that we're going to be off the air if this was radio, but this is not. It's a podcast feed. So we're not going to be in your podcast feed for a couple of weeks, but we'll be back in the new year. Until next time and until next year, we'll talk to you then.